The Butcher of Prague, the rise and fall of Reinhard Heydrich. Welcome to Bio Bytes, where we bring history's most intriguing figures to life, one story at a time. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth biographies. Reinhard Heydrich's story begins in the quiet town of Halle, Germany, on March 7, 1904. Born into a world of music and privilege, his family's life was steeped in culture and national pride. His father, Richard, was a composer of some renown, a man who saw music not just as an art, but as a reflection of his patriotic devotion to Germany. This devotion was passed on to Reinhard and his siblings, along with a deep appreciation for discipline and artistry. Reinhard's childhood revolved around the piano, the violin, and the strict expectations of a family that held themselves to high standards. By the time he was a boy, Reinhard had become a gifted violinist, able to command attention with his precision and skill. But his talents extended far beyond music. At school, he was a sharp and capable student, and on the athletic field, he excelled. He swam with speed and strength and developed a fencer's grace and focus, qualities that set him apart early on. But Reinhard's idyllic childhood was not to last. By the time he turned 10, the First World War had erupted, throwing Germany into years of turmoil. Though his family was relatively well off, the hardships of war began to creep into their lives. As the conflict dragged on, even families like the Heydrichs felt the tightening grip of economic strain. The stability that had defined Reinhard's early years was slowly slipping away. The end of the war in 1918 brought not peace but chaos. Germany was left fractured, its economy in ruins, and its people struggling to adapt to a new, uncertain reality. For a young boy like Reinhard, this was a world that demanded resilience and adaptation, a world where survival meant toughness, resourcefulness, and a readiness to seize opportunity wherever it might appear. These formative years shaped the man Reinhard Heydrich would become. The discipline of his childhood, the upheaval of his youth, and the lessons learned in a country grappling with defeat, all of it forged within him an ambition that would come to define his life. It was an ambition that would take him far from the concert halls and athletic fields of his youth into a much darker, more dangerous arena. The end of World War I brought chaos to Germany. The once mighty empire lay defeated, its economy in shambles, and its streets filled with anger and desperation. For young Reinhard Heydrich, these were transformative years. The boy who had grown up in a home of music and discipline now found himself in a country gripped by turmoil, where ideologies clashed violently in the aftermath of war. Germany's political landscape fractured as radical groups vied for power. On one side were the communists, emboldened by revolution in Russia and eager to spread their ideology. On the other, nationalist factions began to rise, determined to restore German pride and order. It was in this climate, at just 15 years old, that Reinhard Heydrich took his first steps into a world far removed from the comfort of his upbringing. The Freikorps, bands of disillusioned former soldiers and fervent nationalists, offered young men like Heydrich a chance to fight back against the growing tide of left-wing unrest. They were not bound by military rules or the oversight of the state. Instead, they were free to act as they saw fit, using brute force to restore what they believed to be order. For a teenager seeking purpose in a chaotic world, the Freikorps was a call to arms. Heydrich joined their ranks, trading the innocence of youth for a rifle and the grim camaraderie of the battlefield. The Freikorps operated with ruthless efficiency, quelling uprisings and stamping out resistance wherever it appeared. Their methods were brutal, and the lines between soldier and vigilante blurred. For Heydrich, this was not just a chance to serve. It was an introduction to the power that could come from control and fear. The experience was formative. It exposed him to the raw forces of authority, violence, and loyalty to a cause. The chaos of these years likely cemented his belief in the necessity of order at any cost, a philosophy that would guide him for the rest of his life. In the Freikorps, Reinhard Heydrich wasn't just a boy learning to navigate a fractured world. He was a young man beginning to understand the tools of domination and power. Through those battles, through the smoke and shouts of the Freikorps campaigns, Heydrich's path began to take shape. It was a path that would lead him to ever greater authority, one that would ultimately shape his infamous place in history. In 1922, Reinhard Heydrich's life took a decisive turn when he joined the German Navy. At just 18, he traded the uncertain streets of post-war Germany for the disciplined world of military service. The Navy offered structure, purpose, and a path to prestige. For a young man with ambition, it was the perfect place to carve out a future. Heydrich thrived in the rigid environment. His sharp intellect and physical aptitude earned him recognition, and he quickly rose through the ranks. By 1924, he had become an ensign, and his future seemed bright. His commanding presence and meticulous attention to detail made him a natural leader, and he cultivated a reputation as a man destined for success. The Navy wasn't just a career for Heydrich. It was an escape from the turbulence of post-war Germany, and a chance to build a life of honor and achievement. Yet beneath the polished uniform and promising trajectory, cracks were forming. Heydrich's personal life was far less disciplined than his professional one, and those cracks would soon bring his naval career crashing down. During his time in the Navy, Heydrich developed a reputation not just for his skill, but also for his charm. Women were drawn to his striking appearance and air of confidence. He engaged in several romantic entanglements, each more complicated than the last. One of these relationships would prove to be his undoing. In 1931, a young woman, the daughter of a high-ranking naval officer, accused Heydrich of promising marriage and then abandoning her. The accusation reached the ears of the Naval Command, and the matter quickly spiraled. For the Navy, this was not merely a personal issue, it was a question of honor. Heydrich was charged with conduct unbecoming an officer. The trial was swift, and the verdict was damning. Reinhard Heydrich, once a rising star in the German Navy, was dismissed in disgrace. Stripped of his rank and his future, he was cast out into a Germany still struggling to find its footing after the Great War. But even as his naval career ended, another chapter in Heydrich's life was beginning. Despite his fall from grace, one person remained steadfast by his side: Lena von Osten, his fiancée. Lena was a devoted supporter of the National Socialist movement, and she saw in Reinhard not a disgraced officer, but a man of untapped potential. Her connections within the Nazi Party would soon open doors for Heydrich that no military uniform ever could. Jobless and humiliated, Heydrich stood at a crossroads. The disciplined officer of the Navy was gone, replaced by a man searching for purpose in a country teetering on the edge of radical change. And with Lena's encouragement, Reinhard Heydrich would soon find a new cause, one that would forever change the course of his life and the lives of millions. Reinhard Heydrich's dismissal from the Navy might have seemed like the end of his ambitions, but it proved to be a turning point. Left adrift in a nation still grappling with economic despair and political upheaval, he faced an uncertain future. Yet through the unwavering support of his fiancée, Lena von Osten, Heydrich was about to step into a world that would redefine him entirely. Lena, fiercely loyal to the growing National Socialist movement, saw potential in her husband-to-be. She believed his sharp mind, discipline, and hunger for purpose could find a home within the rising Nazi Party. Through her connections, she arranged for Reinhard to meet Heinrich Himmler, the man charged with expanding and shaping the SS into a powerful tool for the party. The meeting was nothing short of pivotal. Reinhard Heydrich, still bruised from his fall from the Navy, stood before Himmler with no experience in intelligence work. Yet he spoke with confidence, presenting himself as a man of action, capable of building systems and enforcing order. It was this confidence, paired with his precise demeanor, that caught Himmler's attention. Himmler had a vision for the SS, a force that would not only protect Adolf Hitler, but also wield the tools of surveillance and control. He needed someone to create and lead an intelligence branch, a task requiring cunning, loyalty, and a talent for secrecy. Despite Heydrich's lack of formal training, Himmler was convinced he had found his man. Within days, Reinhard Heydrich was named head of the SS Intelligence Service. His new role offered a fresh start, but the expectations were immense. He was tasked with building the intelligence apparatus from scratch, with little funding and few resources. Where others might have faltered, Heydrich thrived. He threw himself into his work, creating networks of informants and spies. Using blackmail, manipulation, and an unrelenting focus on results, he quickly gained a reputation as a man who got things done. Opponents of the Nazi Party were identified and neutralized, while internal dissent within the ranks was silenced with ruthless efficiency. In a matter of months, Reinhard Heydrich transformed himself from a disgraced naval officer into a rising star within the SS. His mastery of espionage and psychological warfare earned him Himmler's trust, and his influence began to grow. The man once searching for direction had found a new purpose, one that aligned perfectly with his skills and ambition. But with this new role came new dangers. The work Heydrich was doing demanded secrecy, loyalty, and the willingness to operate in the shadows. It was a path that required sacrificing not just his past, but his humanity. And for Reinhard Heydrich, the journey into darkness had only just begun. As Reinhard Heydrich's influence within the SS grew, so too did the scrutiny surrounding him. For a man whose power depended on loyalty to the ideals of the Nazi Party, even the faintest question about his background could be dangerous. In a regime obsessed with racial purity, whispers of Jewish ancestry were more than just rumors. They were potential weapons. The allegations began quietly, murmurs among rivals and detractors within the party. They pointed to Heydrich's family history, suggesting that a Jewish ancestor might lurk in his bloodline. For a man tasked with enforcing the Nazi vision of Aryan supremacy, such claims were not only embarrassing, they were potentially career-ending. Heydrich, who prided himself on control and precision, found himself vulnerable in a way he had never experienced before. His enemies within the party, jealous of his rapid rise, fanned the flames of suspicion. Even Himmler, who had placed great trust in Heydrich, could not ignore the allegations. To preserve the integrity of the SS, an internal investigation was ordered. The process was invasive and humiliating. Genealogists pored over Heydrich's family records, tracing his lineage in search of any hint of Jewish ancestry. Every branch of his family tree was examined, every name scrutinized. For weeks, the cloud of suspicion hung over him, threatening to undo everything he had built. When the investigation finally concluded, the results were in Heydrich's favor. The findings declared his bloodline free of Jewish heritage, clearing him to continue his work within the SS. Officially, the matter was put to rest, but in the shadows, the rumors refused to die. Whispers persisted, hushed conversations questioning the thoroughness of the investigation or hinting at a cover-up. For Heydrich, it was a bitter pill to swallow. The rumors, though officially dismissed, remained a thorn in his side, a reminder that even in a position of power, he was not invincible. It deepened his paranoia, driving him to greater extremes to prove his loyalty and worth to the Nazi cause. In public, Reinhard Heydrich projected an image of unwavering authority, a man above reproach. But beneath the surface, the rumors about his ancestry were a silent, persistent shadow. They were never openly challenged, yet they lingered, a quiet reminder that even the most powerful figures could be brought low by doubt and suspicion. And for a man as ambitious as Heydrich, there could be no greater fear than that of falling from grace. By 1934, Reinhard Heydrich had cemented his place within the upper echelons of the Nazi regime. His talent for espionage and his unflinching ruthlessness had made him indispensable to Heinrich Himmler. What began as a modest role within the SS had quickly evolved into something far greater. Heydrich was now head of both the Gestapo and the Sicherheitsdienst, or SD, effectively making him the chief architect of intelligence and security in Hitler's Germany. It was a position that required more than just skill. It demanded cunning, ambition, and a willingness to wield power without hesitation. Heydrich had all of these in abundance. Under his leadership, the Gestapo transformed into a tool of terror, rooting out dissent and ensuring absolute loyalty to the Nazi Party. Informants, blackmail, and brutal interrogations became the hallmarks of his reign, creating an atmosphere of fear and obedience. But his rise to power was not just a matter of enforcing control, it was about consolidating it. By 1934, Tension within the Nazi Party itself had reached a breaking point. The SA, the party's original paramilitary wing, had grown into an unwieldy force under its leader, Ernst Röhm. With over 2 million members, the SA posed a direct threat to Hitler's authority, as well as to the regular German army. Hitler knew that the SA's power had to be curbed, and Himmler and Heydrich saw an opportunity. They positioned themselves as indispensable allies to Hitler, convincing him that the SS could be the solution to his problem. Together, they planned what would come to be known as the Night of the Long Knives. Heydrich played a central role in orchestrating the purge. Using the intelligence networks he had meticulously built, he identified targets, men within the SA who posed a threat, as well as other political enemies and potential rivals. Lists were drawn up, and orders were prepared. On the night of June 30th, 1934, the operation began. Gestapo agents and SS units swept through Germany, arresting and executing Röhm and dozens of others. The purge was swift and brutal, eliminating not only the SA's leadership, but also any lingering opposition to Hitler's rule. It was a masterstroke of political violence, one that solidified Hitler's control and elevated the SS to the pinnacle of power within the Nazi hierarchy. For Heydrich, it was a personal triumph. His role in the Night of the Long Knives demonstrated not only his loyalty to Hitler, but also his unmatched ability to wield power with precision. In the wake of the purge, the Gestapo and SD became untouchable, their authority extending into every corner of German society. Reinhard Heydrich had emerged as one of the most powerful men in the Third Reich, a figure both feared and respected within the Nazi hierarchy. His rise was fueled by ambition, but it was sustained by his unique ability to navigate the treacherous waters of Nazi politics. And as his influence grew, so too did his capacity for cruelty, a trait that would define the next chapter of his life. Reinhard Heydrich's ascent within the Nazi hierarchy marked the beginning of a terrifying transformation in Germany's internal security apparatus. As head of the Gestapo and the Sicherheitsdienst, he saw an opportunity to reshape these institutions into instruments of absolute control. What had once been separate entities with limited scope were soon fused into a single, formidable machine under the iron grip of the SS. Heydrich understood that the power of fear was his most effective weapon. The Gestapo, now fully integrated into the SS, became the very embodiment of that fear. It was no longer merely a state police force. It was a silent predator, operating without oversight, above the law, and answerable only to the Nazi leadership. Every action taken by its agents served to tighten the regime's stranglehold on the German population. He meticulously expanded the organization, deploying thousands of agents and informants across the Reich. These operatives worked in the shadows, monitoring citizens, infiltrating opposition groups, and rooting out anyone deemed disloyal to the Nazi cause. Ordinary Germans, once wary of speaking their minds, now lived in constant paranoia. A careless word or a private disagreement could result in a midnight knock on the door, a disappearance, and a one-way ticket to a concentration camp. But Heydrich didn't just rely on brute force. He built an intelligence network that rivaled anything seen in Europe. By collecting dossiers on politicians, military officers, and even members of the Nazi Party, he wielded blackmail as effectively as he wielded terror. No one, not even the most loyal party members, felt safe from his gaze. Under his leadership, the SS and Gestapo grew exponentially, fueled by the systematic dismantling of any institution that might challenge their authority. Local police forces, once accountable to regional governments, were brought under the SS's control. Civilian courts became irrelevant, as justice was now dictated by the party's will, with Heydrich at the center of it all. What made this expansion even more effective was Heydrich's strategic cunning. He didn't just enforce compliance, he ensured it by creating a system where loyalty was mandatory, betrayal inevitable, and trust non-existent. Families turned against each other. Friends became informants. A word of suspicion was all it took to destroy a life. Heydrich's Gestapo became the ultimate enforcer of Nazi ideology, silencing dissent before it could gain momentum. The organization's reach was limitless, extending into homes, workplaces, and even places of worship. Nowhere was safe, and everyone was a potential target. By the late 1930s, Reinhard Heydrich had built a security empire that not only protected the Nazi regime but also crushed its enemies with unparalleled efficiency. The SS and Gestapo were no longer just tools of the state. They were extensions of Heydrich's own vision of order through fear. It was a vision that ensured his power while plunging an entire nation into a nightmare from which there was no escape. By 1938, Reinhard Heydrich's grip on Nazi Germany's security forces was ironclad, and his influence extended into every corner of the regime. It was during this time that his cruelty and meticulous planning reached horrifying new heights. That year, the Nazi Party was preparing to escalate its persecution of the Jewish population, and Heydrich would be at the center of one of the darkest episodes in German history. The spark came in early November, when a young Jewish man, Herschel Grinspan, assassinated a German diplomat in Paris. The Nazis seized upon the incident as an excuse to unleash a wave of violence against Jewish communities. Reinhard Heydrich, ever the efficient planner, was given the task of orchestrating what would become known as Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. Heydrich wasted no time. Within hours of the diplomat's death, he issued detailed instructions to the Gestapo and local police forces. The orders were chilling in their precision. Jewish synagogues were to be burned. Jewish homes, businesses, and schools were to be destroyed. Jewish men were to be arrested in mass numbers. But most significantly, the police were instructed not to intervene unless non-Jewish properties were at risk. This directive ensured that the violence could unfold without resistance. On the night of November 9, 1938, chaos erupted across Germany and Austria. Flames lit up the night sky as synagogues were set ablaze, their sacred artifacts consumed in the inferno. Windows of Jewish businesses were shattered, their shards of glass scattering the streets like a grotesque carpet. Homes were ransacked, and terrified families were forced into the cold night, powerless to stop the destruction. Heydrich's machine operated with brutal efficiency. As the Gestapo rounded up thousands of Jewish men and sent them to concentration camps, their captors made no effort to hide their intentions. This was not just about terrorizing a population. It was about sending a message. Jews had no place in Nazi Germany. By the time the violence subsided, nearly 100 Jews had been killed, and countless others were injured. Over 7,000 Jewish businesses lay in ruins, and hundreds of synagogues were destroyed. The streets, littered with broken glass, gave the pogrom its name, Kristallnacht. Heydrich's role in this atrocity was pivotal. His detailed planning ensured that the violence unfolded exactly as intended, with no interference and maximum impact. It marked a turning point in Nazi policy, as sporadic acts of discrimination gave way to systematic persecution. Kristallnacht wasn't just a night of terror. It was the beginning of an unrelenting campaign to strip Jewish people of their homes, their rights, and eventually their lives. For Heydrich, it was another demonstration of his ruthless efficiency and his ability to execute the Nazi regime's most horrific plans. For the Jewish community, it was a harbinger of the unimaginable horrors still to come. Kristallnacht was a dark milestone on the path to genocide, and Reinhard Heydrich had ensured its devastating success. In 1938, the Nazi regime turned its ambitions outward, seeking to expand Germany's borders and tighten its grip on Europe. The annexations of Austria and Czechoslovakia would become critical steps in Hitler's vision of a greater Reich, and Reinhard Heydrich stood at the center of the machinery that would make these conquests possible. The first target was Austria. The annexation, or Anschluss, was framed as a unification of German-speaking peoples, but beneath the propaganda lay the cold reality of Nazi domination. Heydrich's intelligence networks worked tirelessly to destabilize Austrian resistance. Using propaganda, espionage, and intimidation, they sowed discord among the Austrian leadership and fueled pro-Nazi sentiment within the population. When German troops crossed into Austria in March 1938, they were met with jubilant crowds. But behind the facade of celebration, Heydrich's Einsatzgruppen, a special SS unit trained for rapid and ruthless action, moved swiftly. Their task was clear: identify and eliminate any potential opposition. Political leaders, journalists, and activists were arrested, silenced, or executed. Jewish citizens, already marginalized, found themselves targeted with increasing ferocity. Under Heydrich's direction, the forced emigration of Austrian Jews began almost immediately. An office was set up in Vienna to facilitate this grim exodus, stripping Jews of their property and forcing them to flee with little more than the clothes on their backs. It was an early experiment in the systematic persecution that would later engulf all of Europe. With Austria under control, the Nazis turned their sights on Czechoslovakia. This time, the process was more complex. The Sudetenland, a border region with a large German-speaking population, became the pretext for intervention. Heydrich and his operatives used similar tactics, fomenting unrest and supporting local pro-Nazi groups to weaken the Czechoslovak government. In September 1938, the Munich Agreement handed the Sudetenland to Germany without a fight, a diplomatic victory for Hitler. But Heydrich's work was far from over. In March 1939, German troops invaded the remainder of Czechoslovakia, completing the conquest. Once again, the Einsatzgruppen moved in swiftly, targeting political dissidents, intellectuals, and resistance members. Arrests and executions followed, creating a climate of fear that left the nation subdued. For the Jewish population of Czechoslovakia, the occupation brought the same horrors seen in Austria. Forced emigration policies intensified, while ghettos began to take shape. Families were uprooted, livelihoods destroyed, and futures erased under the weight of Heydrich's relentless policies. Through these operations, Heydrich proved his efficiency as a master of terror and control. His ability to suppress opposition, enforce Nazi ideology, and dismantle societies became a critical asset to the regime. The annexations of Austria and Czechoslovakia were more than territorial gains. They were brutal demonstrations of the methods that would soon define the Nazi conquest of Europe. For Reinhard Heydrich, these campaigns were both a test and a triumph. They showcased his talent for wielding power with ruthless precision, further cementing his place as one of the most feared figures in the Third Reich. And for those who fell under his rule, they marked the beginning of a nightmare that would only grow darker with time. By 1942, Reinhard Heydrich had solidified his place as one of the most powerful figures in Nazi Germany. His control over the SS, Gestapo, and Sicherheitsdienst made him the regime's master of intelligence, security, and repression. But his most infamous role was yet to come. As Hitler and Himmler turned their attention to the so-called Jewish question, it was Heydrich who would be tasked with crafting its horrifying solution. The groundwork for genocide had been laid years earlier through discriminatory laws, forced emigration, and the establishment of ghettos. But by the early 1940s, these measures were deemed insufficient. The Nazi leadership wanted a comprehensive and permanent answer. Reinhard Heydrich, with his reputation for precision and ruthlessness, was chosen to oversee the operation. In January 1942, high-ranking officials from across the Reich gathered in a villa on the outskirts of Berlin for the Wannsee Conference. Heydrich presided over the meeting, calm and composed, as if the matter at hand were a routine policy discussion. But this was no ordinary meeting. Its purpose was to finalize the logistics of the Holocaust, the systematic extermination of Europe's Jewish population. Heydrich presented his plan with chilling efficiency. 11 million Jews, spread across German-occupied Europe and beyond, would be evacuated to the east. It was a euphemism that masked the true intent: mass murder. Under his direction, Jewish families would be rounded up, transported to concentration camps, and systematically executed. He detailed the process with clinical precision. Jews would be categorized, stripped of their possessions, and sent to labor camps where those deemed unfit to work would be eliminated immediately. Gas chambers, already in use at some facilities, would become the primary method of execution. This approach, Heydrich argued, was not only efficient but essential to maintaining secrecy and minimizing the psychological strain on German soldiers. The men at Wannsee listened, nodded, and offered their input. They discussed the logistics of transport, the definitions of Jewish heritage, and the coordination between various government agencies. There was no moral debate, no hesitation, only cold calculations about how best to achieve the desired outcome. Heydrich left the meeting with full authority to implement his plan. Over the following months, the machinery of genocide began to operate at full capacity. Death camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor became the epicenters of industrialized murder. Trains carried men, women, and children to their deaths, their fates sealed by the decisions made at Wannsee. For Reinhard Heydrich, the Holocaust was the ultimate expression of his vision, a world reshaped by brutality, control, and the eradication of those he deemed unworthy. His meticulous organization ensured the genocide could proceed with horrifying efficiency, leaving a legacy of suffering that would scar humanity forever. By the time of his death later that year, the machinery of the final solution was fully in motion. The Holocaust would claim over 6 million Jewish lives, along with millions of others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime. Reinhard Heydrich, more than anyone else, had turned the horrifying idea into a grim reality. His cold, methodical planning set the stage for one of the darkest chapters in human history, a chapter that serves as a stark reminder of the depths to which ambition and hatred can sink. In the summer of 1941, as German forces surged into the Soviet Union, Reinhard Heydrich's role in the war expanded to a scale of unprecedented cruelty. The invasion, known as Operation Barbarossa, was not only a military campaign, it was a war of annihilation. Hitler had decreed that this was a battle to destroy not just armies, but entire peoples, and Heydrich was entrusted with ensuring that this grim directive was carried out. The Einsatzgruppen, special mobile killing units under Heydrich's control, followed closely behind the advancing German army. Their mission was clear: to eliminate anyone deemed a threat to the Nazi regime. This included Jews, communists, partisans, and anyone who might resist German occupation. But these units didn't just target individuals, they aimed to erase entire communities. In town after town, the Einsatzgruppen carried out mass shootings, herding men, women, and children into fields, forests, or ravines. Victims were forced to dig their own graves before being executed. The sound of gunfire echoed across the countryside, and the earth became a patchwork of hastily dug mass graves. One of the most infamous massacres occurred at Babi Yar, near Kiev, where over 33,000 Jews were murdered in just 2 days. The scale of the atrocities was staggering. Villages were emptied, their populations annihilated. Entire Jewish communities that had existed for centuries vanished in a matter of weeks. The Einsatzgruppen's methods were brutally efficient, but they also had a devastating psychological impact on the soldiers carrying out the killings. Reports of soldiers breaking down or refusing to participate prompted the Nazi leadership to accelerate the development of gas chambers as a less personal method of extermination. Heydrich's actions in the East went beyond mass murder. His policies of repression and terror alienated local populations that might have otherwise supported the German invasion. Many in the occupied territories despised Stalin's regime and might have welcomed the Germans as liberators, but the indiscriminate brutality of the Einsatzgruppen turned potential allies into enemies. Resistance movements grew, fueled by the widespread suffering inflicted by Heydrich's forces. Despite these strategic failures, Heydrich remained unyielding in his commitment to the Nazi vision. For him, the atrocities were not just a means to an end. They were part of the end itself. The destruction of undesirable populations was central to the regime's goals, and Heydrich was determined to see it through, regardless of the cost. By the time the tide of war began to turn against Germany, millions had been slaughtered in the East. Communities were reduced to ashes, and the land itself bore the scars of Heydrich's reign of terror. Yet, his policies had also weakened Germany's position, creating enemies where there might have been allies and draining resources that could have been used on the battlefield. Reinhard Heydrich's role in the invasion of the Soviet Union left a legacy of horror that would haunt Eastern Europe for generations. His Einsatzgruppen not only carried out some of the worst atrocities of the Holocaust, but also exemplified the ruthlessness and short-sightedness that ultimately contributed to the collapse of the Nazi war effort. In his relentless pursuit of destruction, Heydrich sowed seeds of resistance that would grow stronger with each act of brutality, ensuring that his reign, however terrifying, would not endure. In the autumn of 1941, Reinhard Heydrich was given a new assignment, one that would further cement his reputation as one of the most feared figures in the Third Reich. He was appointed Deputy Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia, a region that encompassed much of what was then Czechoslovakia. The area, with its strategic industries and skilled workforce, was vital to the Nazi war effort, but it was also a hotbed of resistance. Heydrich was sent to crush dissent and bring the region under complete Nazi control. From the moment he arrived in Prague, Heydrich made his presence felt. Traveling through the city in an open-top car, he projected an air of confidence and authority, a man utterly convinced of his invincibility. But beneath the surface of this calculated display lay the cold brutality for which he had become infamous. Heydrich wasted no time in implementing his strategy. Resistance leaders were rounded up, interrogated, and executed without trial. Entire families were arrested on the suspicion of anti-German activities, their fates sealed by Heydrich's signature on a piece of paper. The Gestapo's prisons overflowed with political prisoners, many of whom would never see the outside world again. But Heydrich's methods weren't limited to terror. He understood the importance of maintaining order and productivity in the region, especially its critical arms industry. To this end, he implemented a series of reforms designed to placate the population, at least on the surface. Workers were given better wages and benefits, and pensions were improved. Propaganda emphasized these benevolent measures, portraying Heydrich as a leader committed to the well-being of the people, so long as they remained obedient. This combination of terror and reform proved effective, at least in the short term. Resistance activity waned, and arms production surged. Factories churned out weapons and supplies for the German war machine, a grim testament to Heydrich's efficiency. But beneath the veneer of compliance, resentment simmered. The Czechoslovak people had not forgotten the price of defiance, and their hatred for the Nazi regime, and for Heydrich in particular, grew with each passing day. It was during this time that Heydrich earned the nickname the Butcher of Prague. The title was not given lightly. His ruthless suppression of dissent, combined with his calculated propaganda efforts, created an atmosphere of fear and submission. For Heydrich, this was a mark of success, a region brought to heel through the meticulous application of terror and control. But his arrogance would prove to be his undoing. Heydrich's belief in his own invulnerability led him to dismiss concerns about his personal safety. He often traveled through Prague with minimal security, a decision that would ultimately cost him his life. For now, though, he remained at the height of his power, a man whose cruelty and cunning had made him a symbol of Nazi oppression in Czechoslovakia. The legacy of his rule would endure far beyond his death. The scars left by his reign of terror would take generations to heal, and the name Reinhard Heydrich would forever be associated with one of the darkest chapters in the history of Czechoslovakia. For those who lived under his rule, the fear he instilled and the lives he destroyed would never be forgotten. By 1942, Reinhard Heydrich had become one of the most powerful and feared figures in Nazi-occupied Europe. His reign over Bohemia and Moravia was brutal, his methods efficient, and his confidence unshakable. He moved through Prague in his signature open-top Mercedes, a symbol of both arrogance and defiance. For many, Heydrich seemed untouchable, but for the Czech resistance, he was the ultimate target. In London, the exiled Czechoslovak government, led by Edvard Beneš, sought a way to strike back at the Nazis and prove their relevance to the Allies. Heydrich, the so-called Butcher of Prague, was an obvious choice. His assassination would not only disrupt Nazi control in the region, but also send a powerful message of resistance. British intelligence, through the Special Operations Executive, provided the training and resources for the mission, codenamed Operation Anthropoid. 2 Czech operatives, Jan Kubiš and Josef Gabčík, were chosen to carry out the daring plan. After extensive preparation, they parachuted into occupied Czechoslovakia in December 1941, landing far from their intended drop zone. With the help of local resistance networks, they made their way to Prague and began carefully studying Heydrich's movements. They quickly realized that Heydrich's arrogance was their greatest advantage. Despite repeated warnings from his superiors, he refused to travel with a security detail, relying instead on his own sense of invincibility. He took the same route into the city every day, his car slowing as it rounded a sharp bend near a tram stop, a perfect location for an ambush. On the morning of May 27, 1942, Kubiš and Gabčík took their positions at the bend, waiting nervously as the minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, Heydrich's car appeared. Gabčík stepped into the road and raised his Sten gun to fire, but in that critical moment the weapon jammed. For a brief second, chaos hung in the air. Heydrich, stunned but enraged, ordered his driver to stop. As Heydrich reached for his pistol, Kubiš acted. With a quick motion, he hurled a modified grenade at the car. The explosion shattered the vehicle, sending shards of metal and debris into Heydrich's body. Wounded but still alive, Heydrich staggered from the car, clutching his side, his face contorted in pain. Kubiš and Gabčík fled, pursued briefly by Heydrich's driver, but managed to escape with the help of local contacts. Heydrich was rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save him. Initially, his condition seemed to stabilize, and the Nazis expected their protector to recover. But infection set in, likely caused by debris, including horsehair from the car's upholstery, that had entered his wounds. On June 4, 1942, Reinhard Heydrich succumbed to sepsis, dying at the age of 38. The Nazi response was swift and brutal. Entire villages were destroyed, and thousands of Czechs were arrested, tortured, or executed in the hunt for the assassins. When the operatives were eventually betrayed, they made their final stand in a Prague church, refusing to be taken alive. Their courage inspired resistance movements across Europe, but the cost of their mission was staggering. For the Czech people, Heydrich's death was a moment of both triumph and tragedy. They had struck a devastating blow to the Nazi regime, but the reprisals that followed left scars that would last for generations. Operation Anthropoid remains one of the most daring acts of resistance during the Second World War, a testament to the bravery of those who stood against tyranny, no matter the cost. And for Reinhard Heydrich, the man who once seemed untouchable, his own arrogance had sealed his fate. His death marked the end of his reign of terror, but the legacy of his brutality would endure as a chilling reminder of the depths of human cruelty. The assassination of Reinhard Heydrich sent shockwaves through the Nazi hierarchy. Hitler himself was enraged, calling Heydrich's death a monumental loss to the Reich. The Nazis sought vengeance, not just to punish those responsible, but to send a clear message to all occupied territories. Defiance would be met with unparalleled brutality. The reprisals began almost immediately. Entire villages were targeted in acts of collective punishment. One such village was Lidis, chosen not because of any direct connection to the assassination, but as an example of what defiance would bring. On Hitler's orders, the village was erased from existence. Men were rounded up and executed. Women and children were deported, many of them sent to concentration camps where few would survive. Buildings were burned, and the ground was leveled as if the village had never existed. The massacre at Lidis was repeated elsewhere. The Nazis arrested thousands of suspected resistance members, subjecting them to torture in an effort to extract information. Many were executed, their deaths meant to intimidate others into submission. The cost of Heydrich's death was staggering, and yet for the resistance, it became a symbol of defiance. The assassins and their allies were hailed as heroes, their courage inspiring others across Europe to continue the fight against Nazi oppression. Even after his death, Reinhard Heydrich cast a long shadow over the war. The machinery of terror he had helped to construct continued to operate, claiming countless more lives. The final solution, which he had meticulously planned, unfolded on an unimaginable scale, leaving millions dead and the world scarred by the horror of genocide. Today, Reinhard Heydrich remains one of history's most notorious figures, a symbol of the depths to which human ambition and cruelty can descend. His role in orchestrating the Holocaust places him among the architects of one of the darkest chapters in human history. His ability to carry out his tasks with cold, calculated efficiency makes him a chilling figure, even decades after his death. But Heydrich's story is more than a tale of power and cruelty. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of human rights and the dangers of unchecked authority. The systems he built were not the work of one man, but the result of an ideology that dehumanized millions, turning them into targets of hatred and extermination. His legacy is a warning, a call to remember the atrocities of the past, to prevent them from being repeated. The millions of lives destroyed under his direction stand as a testament to the cost of forgetting. Heydrich's name is etched in history, not as a hero but as a symbol of evil, and his actions ensure that the world will never forget the importance of vigilance against tyranny. For those who perished under his reign, and for those who fought against him, the memory of their suffering and courage endures as a beacon of what must never be allowed to happen again. Thank you for watching Bio Bytes, where we uncover the stories behind history's most impactful figures. If you found this journey through Reinhard Heydrich's chilling legacy thought-provoking, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join us next time for another deep dive into the lives that shaped our world, for better or worse. See you soon.